Robby, since that's not on your radar. What else is on your radar?
Wait, you will for this one. Frankly, I didn't expect to be proven right this quickly, but here we are. Remember just 2 weeks ago when I warned that releasing all of the Epstein files, including not just emails, but also uncorroborated reports and investigative documents, was an unprecedented course of action that could end up exposing innocent people to humiliation and retaliation? Well, guess what? We learned on Friday that 4 of those 6 names uttered by Representative Ro Khanna on the House floor last week, the names of the alleged Epstein co-conspirators whom Representative Thomas Massie said were likely incriminated, are just 4 random people. They have nothing whatsoever to do with Epstein. How is that possible? Let me explain. As part of their investigation, law enforcement with the Southern District of New York assembled a photo lineup of potential suspects. If you watch police procedurals on television, you probably know how this goes. A witness is given a bunch of photos. Only one of them is the suspect, and the investigators see if the witness identifies the correct one. The other photos depict people who have nothing to do with the crime. And that was the case here, as Khanna himself now concedes. The congressman writes on X, "I appreciate reporting confirming today that Salvatore Nuara, Zarab Michelazzi, Leonid Lenov, and Nicola Caputo were just part of a photo lineup and are not connected to Epstein's crimes. I wish DOJ had provided that explanation earlier instead of redacting and then unredacting their names. They have failed to protect survivors, created confusion for innocent men, and have protected rich and powerful abusers. We must have full transparency and the truth." In all fairness to the congressman, Massie did state previously that one reason those 4 names might have been redacted was specifically because they appeared in a police lineup.
And you see no reason why those men's names are redacted in these files?
No, unless they were in some random lineup. But this requires the DOJ to respond to it, just like they responded to my 2 tweets tonight about the Sultan, who had heretofore not been known, and about Lex Wessner, who is in the files listed as a co-conspirator on the file that they unredacted tonight.
Turns out he was right about that, but I think, given this possibility, it was unwise for Khanna to take to the House floor and smear, let's repeat, 4 random people as criminal co-conspirators in a global sex trafficking ring. By the way, this is exactly why it is not common to release investigative files of this nature, because they contain information investigators gathered for whatever reason that may have nothing to do with the case. It's why Representative Clay Higgins of Florida, I keep bringing him up, was the low no vote on the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and he was 1,000% correct when he said this: "It abandons 250 years of criminal justice procedure in America. As written, this bill reveals and injures thousands of innocent people, witnesses, people who provided alibis, family members, etc. If enacted in its current form, this type of broad reveal of criminal investigative files released to a rabid media will absolutely result in innocent people being hurt." End quote. Higgins was right from the start. Now, I can't claim that I came to my senses that quickly, I admit it. But it looks like I got there a little bit quicker than some other folks. To all the people who've been screaming at me online that I'm just running cover for elite sexual abusers, or I don't care about victims, or I'm in league with Israeli intelligence, or whatever the ridiculous smear of the moment is, never too late to put down the pitchforks, folks. And look, Lindsay, I think a lot of what I warned about this case is coming true. Me and Clay
You wanted
Higgins.
5 minutes to say I told you so?
Well, yeah, I did tell you so.
Robby, fine. You have points. Just because you have an example of something doesn't mean that everything should be thrown in the trash otherwise. I think that Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie have, I believe, embarked on something.
I think they screwed up royally.
But I think that they embarked on something that they genuinely believe is worth spending the time on, and possibly for Massie risking his political career on. I think that they do think that there's a lot here. And in this particular case, because Ro Khanna went on the floor and announced these names, he thought that he had a smoking gun and he was incorrect. But the problem was the execution, not the transparency. So the Department of Justice could easily have explained why certain names were redacted over and over again, or at all, prior to handing him sloppy files that they say were turned into them in that way from the FBI and not with no explanation, and turning them over to Massie and Khanna. That's why people are so confused.
I'm not impugning Massie and Khanna's motivations. I know them both. We've had Khanna on the show before. I think They are generally people I like in government. It is not personal at all. I understand why they did what they did, but it was not wise they saw the unredacted files, and then within, 48 hours of that, earlier, they saw them, I think, over the weekend or on Monday, and then within 2 days or so, Kana's on the House floor saying, here are 4 names. I mean, they could have waited.
That's what you called for. You want him, he's saying he has a smoking gun. He was obviously misled.
And he was wrong.
Yes, he was wrong.
He was totally wrong. So I mean, look, I could say something on television. I could say I have evidence that 4 people are complicit in, again, the most horrible crime. It's not, I didn't say not all the information adds up with their tax filings this year. They said criminally indicated in a global sex trafficking ring. Then, oops. No, they have absolutely nothing to do with it. That's why that's why this power should not be abused. A, the power to be immune from libel or defamation when you say things on the House floor, that shouldn't be abused. B, this is why we don't just release investigative files. This is why we've never done this before. For exactly the reason Clay Higgins says, is that it doesn't, the files contain information that police gathered that has nothing to do with Epstein.
Well, I think because there's a mistrust in government right now, and because people are asking for all of these files, there's I think, legitimate argument about whether people
are self-protecting. Is this addressing the mistrust? Is this reducing the mistrust?
Some of it is legitimate, like saying Lex Wessner is in there and really looking into that. And then other people are just catching a stray, which is, you're right, not right. They can sue.
Lex Wexner was already known.
Okay, but there's people that want to know how to connect the dots exactly here. There possibly could have been co-conspirators. The only reason why we don't fully know that is because we didn't have a chance to bring Epstein fully to justice in 2019 because of murky details about what happened and how he was killed. And so that's what we're told. But CBS released footage of some possible other person in the jail maybe going to his cell that was also in the Epstein files that was written but not told to the American public. So you can understand why people are concerned about what we're being told versus what the truth is.
Okay, but that was not the reason to release these files, was not to shed more light on the circumstances of Epstein's death itself. It was because there was a public perception and a claim by members of Congress and various talking heads and partisan people on both sides of the political spectrum that other powerful people, that Epstein had procured underage women to be sexually abused by other powerful people, and we didn't get justice in those cases. And for some reason, the victims can't tell us who they are. So we need the government, we need the investigative files where the police were recording information on whoever that was, and they had that information and didn't do anything with it, or there were settlements or whatever, and we need to know that information. And that has utterly, completely collapsed that idea.
The reason why this is all connected, because unlike in 2008, there was not going to be a lenient plea deal available for Epstein. So in that case, he might have led to spilling out the beans on other names that might have been involved in this possible ring that you keep talking about.
Maybe.
Yes, but since we lost that access, obviously the person died, people still want answers. There are real people that have been involved in this that actually want answers that for whatever reason, I'm not victim shaming, are not coming forward and saying the names. And so Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie are taking on the noble task of trying to figure it out. But if the DOJ and FBI did their job well and provided Congress to oversee the proper information so that they can oversee well, then we wouldn't have all these questions and releasing inappropriate names.
4 random people got smeared as co-conspirators in a criminal sexual abuse scandal. My understanding is one of them already lost his job. They're all going to suffer massive consequences because of this. And I think it was shameful what has been done to them, and they are owed an apology, and we should be rethinking some of this project. But that's my take.
Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, I made fun of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez yesterday on Rising after listening to her get tripped up when discussing U.S.-Taiwan policy at the Munich Security Conference a few days ago, but her remarks on that topic were brilliant and statesmanlike when compared with what she had to say about South America. Can AOC even find the continent on a map? Hint, it's down there. After listening to her say the following, I'm doubtful. Watch this.
We look at what happened in Venezuela, for example. It is not a remark on who Maduro was as a leader. He canceled elections. He was an anti-democratic leader. That doesn't mean that we can kidnap a head of state and engage in acts of war just because the nation is below the equator.
Ooh, quick fact check there. The country of Venezuela is entirely north of the equator. You can consult a map if you don't believe me. Perhaps AOC should put as much effort into learning geography as she does perfecting her Latin American accent. I'm envious of those rolled R's, to be sure, but I'd like a possible presidential contender to know even basic facts about the areas of the world she's discussing. But honestly, the Venezuela gaffe was not as significant as this next one, more troubling than a mere geography blunder. AOC doesn't appear to understand the history of the Americas and the role that European colonization played in it. Watch this misinformed criticism she made of Secretary of State Marco Rubio's remarks on the origins of cowboy culture.
Marco Rubio's speech was a pure appeal to Western culture. My favorite part was when he said that American cowboys came from Spain.
I thought they came from Winnetou, but
I believe the Mexicans and descendants of African enslaved peoples would like to have a word on that.
What? Spain is absolutely the originator of cowboy culture, not enslaved African persons. It was the Europeans who reintroduced horses to the Americas after they had died out thousands of years before. In South America, that was the Spanish conquistadors. The vaqueros, Mexican cowboys, sorry, I can't pronounce it as accurately as AOC, they had distinct Spanish influences, and that influence spread up through Texas to the American Southwest. That's what happened. Sorry. It's disconcerting that AOC would go to Europe and then minimize the achievements and contributions of Europeans to American culture. I'm also troubled that the Europeans in the room laughed along with her. Do they want their own culture erased? Is that what progressive leftism, the ideology of AOC, the one she wants to install over all of us, is that what it seeks to achieve? I was assured by liberal Democrats that President Trump and Vice President Vance, who are the ones offending Europeans all the time and damaging the U.S.-Europe relationship by downplaying the significance of it. But AOC is downplaying our shared history in service of uplifting a false narrative about native and marginalized peoples, I suppose, which is ultimately the end game of cultural leftism, historical revisionism in the service of identity politics. But thank goodness we had Rubio over there setting everybody straight. Maybe he could offer to tutor AOC in Latin American history and geography. I hear he doesn't have quite enough jobs to do yet.
He does have 1,000 jobs.
So, look, I wouldn't be too harsh on her for just the Venezuela thing. You know, it's a little bit like when Tucker challenged Ted Cruz, what's the exact population of Iran? Okay, whatever. But the other part of it is significant. You should understand that, like, what informs American culture in the Southwest is an influence of Mexican of people going from Mexico into Texas who were culturally part of the Spanish conquest of South America, Latin America. Like, that's a pretty basic understanding of history that she was mocking Rubio for claiming.
Well, I think maybe she just
What's
started.
going on there?
She started at a later point in history when we think about when America,
What?
I'm talking about a later point in history when we think about how America receives cowboy cultures. The only reason I'm saying this is because I did a documentary about it in Denver, about how cowboy culture did come largely from the South, that came from Mexico in the way that we see cowboys. So yes, vaqueros and everything that we're bringing up is all past the point, though. We can go into the history of cowboys.
I guess we're going into it.
We're taking up too much space right here
She didn't
to
need
talk
to take
about
a
the fact
shot
that
at Rubio and be wrong.
I know, but policy is not what she got wrong here. Facts is what she got wrong here about the equator location and about cowboy history. The real thing and the real nervousness, I believe, that's coming from all the criticism of her, because usually when somebody's highly criticized, it means the spotlight is on them, is that she went to this international conference and looked to a lot of people quite presidential. And so what we really should be talking about is the distinct difference of policy that she's offering as opposed to who could be her contender, Marco Rubio, in the next presidential election. They both were laying out a vastly different plans for international experiences in America and how we deal with the international community. And I think that is the bigger conversation coming out of here, as opposed to if she thinks it's right below the equator or right above it. I mean, it's literally right on the equator.
Okay,
so
but
I just don't understand why everybody wants to be so wrapped up in.
Let me tell you why this is, I think, actually quite important. And the reason for that is, well, one,
she started with him.
You've been telling me that Trump and Vance are harming our relationship with Europe. does it not harm our relationship with Europe to minimize their contributions to the American project? I agree that there is European influence on Americans. On the founding of the U.S. clearly comes from Enlightenment, British elements of French philosophy and Greco-Roman history, and there are Dutch influence. It's very European, the founding of our country. The continent itself, significant Portuguese, Dutch, French, Spanish influences. That's all important. And she was trying to erase that. She said it was African enslaved persons. She wanted to talk about, make it an identity politics, the triumph of marginalized people. And that is historical revisionism. It's leftist, and it's why someone of a leftist, Marxist ideology would be dangerous as our president.
Well, I think both things can be true, right? We know that there were a ton of black cowboys, at least I do from the documentary I produced in Denver, that were completely erased out of the conversation, that had a large part to do with how cowboy culture is viewed
by Mexican, Hispanic. I'm not saying
there. Yeah, no, I know.
So, can be cowboys,
no, I know.
obviously.
I'm saying that she is pointing to that, and she got it wrong. She's forgetting to include the history before that. She's talking about directly in our country. But when I think about what AOC is doing and being there on the global stage, is she really harming the relationship by that comment more than we are threatening Greenland, or by taxing and tariffing our counterparts and friends to death? Is she doing much more harm with actual statements that she got wrong that she can easily correct, as opposed to actions that leave people economically in despair because of our tariffs and some things that we're doing internationally? So tell me, or leave the Greenland prime minister trying to come negotiate because he's scared for his life, and the people of Greenland telling them, please don't come over here and take our land.
Yes, Greenland,
I'm just saying, this is what we're doing internationally,
and
versus what she's saying.
I don't think the president should make light of the shared. I'm for European cultural recognition of the import.
So you want her to apologize?
The European culture has had on the U.S.
and correct herself.
I just want her to do some tutoring, get some tutoring lessons from Marco, and then it'll be fine.
So you don't want to talk about anything about her idea for the working class and the things that she said over there?
Well,
that
those are
actually
bad ideas.
Had merit.
You can go back and listen to what we talked about
yesterday.
What she had to say about Taiwan and other things. I also don't like her solutions, but I think the reason I don't like her solutions is they're following from a place of historical illiteracy.
Robby, what's in your radar?
Well, another day, another semi-deranged conversation on the Abby Phillips Show on CNN. This time, Shark Tank's Kevin O'Leary set Teslin Figaro, a progressive political commentator, straight on matters of criminal justice and American history. The conversation was about a legitimate news subject, a judge's decision to restore an exhibit about slavery at Independence National Historic Park in Philadelphia. And that's all good by me. I agree we should teach real history of the U.S., not some sanitized version. I've been clear on that for years. In this country, the realities of slavery and the Civil War are taught and should be taught to children. We already do a good job of that, I think, in most schools throughout the U.S. But if you have ideas for how we can do it even better, I'm all ears. But it sounds to me like it's Figaro herself who needs a history lesson. Listen to her and O'Leary arguing.
It's so interesting that you said that, because right before we went to break, you asked me what country was I living in. This one that we just went through.
You should be
the country
happy to
that
live
did
here.
the country that just did what they did. So for you to sit here and act like you just didn't say, what country are you talking about? What country, puts people in jail wrong? What country enslaves folks, which is pretty much the private prison system? What country does this? You can't possibly be a history buff and also say that as well.
Did you catch that? The lefty was arguing that there is slavery in the U.S. today, not 200 years ago, but presently, because of the private prison system. And I'm sorry, but that's just totally made up. And it's fine to oppose private prisons as a matter of policy, of course, but private prisons are just prisons that are administered privately. The people incarcerated there are people who have gone through or are going through the criminal justice system. Private prisons don't just abduct people off the streets or something. They incarcerate people at the behest of state prosecutors and state police. You know what countries do imprison hundreds and thousands of people unjustly? Let's name them. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. You notice what wasn't on that list? The United States. O'Leary, of course, followed up with this exact point.
Let me give you how bad it can be. The Romans used to burn to the
You
ground.
can't never
and
give me how bad it
salt
can be.
The
You
earth.
could never give me how bad it could be. I live it on
That
a
was
daily
bad.
basis,
The
baby.
Romans
I
were
live it
pretty
on
bad.
a daily basis, honey.
They were bad
I
dudes.
live it on a daily basis. You can never tell me how bad it could be. But I would encourage you to actually be the history buff that you claim that you are,
Well, where
and
do you
really
wanna
get some
move to?
understanding. It's not about me. I'm not going nowhere. I'm staying right
I
here.
think the
I'll get you a
question
You don't
here,
need to give me no visa to
All
try.
right.
Kevin,
Kevin, I
I'm a
think the
veteran. I'm
question
staying
here
right
would
here.
be,
Now, just because there are other much worse countries out there, it doesn't mean we have to refrain from criticizing the U.S. at all. Moreover, it certainly doesn't mean that we should refrain from criticizing the federal government. But there is a certain kind of left progressive commentator who seems to view America as uniquely bad, uniquely broken, uniquely flawed on a historical scale. But ours is a great nation that saved humanity from the scourges of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, defeated the Soviet Union, one of the most oppressive and carceral regimes in the history of the world, without firing a direct shot. This is a country that works to counteract Islamic authoritarianism and undermines the new threats posed by China and Russia. So how about a little enthusiasm and appreciation for the greatness of America? Maybe liberals could lean into a positive message if they want to win elections ever again.
So I know anybody with a criticism in your book gets labeled a liberal, but let me paint the Teslin picture a little better for you. She's an independent and former veteran of our country. Yeah, and she went around making everybody thank her for her service, which I found quite
that is appropriate.
Yeah, fine, appropriate. So she was explaining
her for that.
No, they were having a conversation about the fact that you can criticize this country without saying the worst of the worst is what we're comparing it to. She's holding our country to the standards of freedom, the standards that we've set through our Constitution for all people. And so she's allowed to be critical of that. And when you bring in
But you
the
don't
prison
believe we
system,
have slavery here in the
well,
West,
let me break it down. Have you watched 13th by Ava DuVernay? It's a really good documentary that you should about the 13th Amendment and how prison labor is compared to slave labor is because it's forced working with no pay. Well, let me finish. It's minimal pay, pennies on the dollar, no oversight. So people are automatically exposed to situations where they're getting taken advantage of, regardless of the crime, right? They're still out there working for free. Many private businesses are profiting from this work, and that causes an incentive to keep more people in jail to keep these companies running. Now, this creates a financial back and forth and incentive for these companies, but also has historical and racial links. So if you look at many present day prison systems, they're on the same land as former slave plantations. So let's talk about Angola in Louisiana. Let's talk about Parchment in Mississippi. So there's a lot of conversation about the same people that were working on these plantations that was actual slavery now has prison laborers that are benefiting private companies working on the same lay of land for pennies or nothing because our criminal justice system allows that and really enhances that. So that's a conversation.
My understanding is that, and I don't know, I've never been to prison, but my understanding is that a whole lot of people who are imprisoned are glad there is work to do because being in prison can be very boring. And no, I mean, like exhaustively boring.
But what dialogue have you had, and what study shows people are glad to work for free?
They are glad to have their time occupied in some way. I'm sure not everyone is, but there are a lot of people in prison like, oh my God, sign me up for some kind of work duty because I'm going to go bored out of my mind. That's
the whole point of the 13th Amendment is that
it's
slavery
not,
was involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime. This is exactly what the 13th Amendment is talking about. Punishment for a crime is working for free? No, it should be go to jail, like you said.
No person can be
but benefiting private
liberty and without due process of the law. They've had due process.
Right, and now companies are benefiting from this free labor, which is the same thing companies were benefiting from the free labor of slaves. And that is the comparison. Whether you disagree or agree is up to you, but the comparison from a veteran, somebody who obviously loves the country because they're going to put their life on the line, is fair for her to suggest. I mean, there's docuseries about this topic, about the fact that maybe that's not the way to get somebody reintegrated into society when they leave jail, is to have them work for free and then be released from prison. And then the recidivism rate is really high. So it really doesn't help that they had gotten to work.
Not having them work and is not going to be...
Have them read books. Have them go to church, Robbie. There's a lot of things that they can do
I'm
in prison.
Good with all that too.
Right. It's just, but working for private companies, you see the benefit.
Prisons that are not administered privately also have work duties for prisoners. So it's not unique to the private.
But I think that besides that, like I do we could argue about prison and how comparative it is to slavery, but the fact that when you criticize the country, and Kevin O'Leary, as you know, is a friend of mine.
Yeah.
Like, I've interviewed him multiple times,
Yeah.
and I don't have a problem with him. We disagree on a lot politically. I do think that it's fair for somebody to say, I'm going to be very critical and hold my country to a high standard, because that's the country that we live in. That's made America what it is today. Because people have challenged when it's not living up to the Constitution.
I think it's going, okay.
And so she's allowed to do that. And,
She's allowed.
and you can't go
My
back and
bottom
say,
line is
well,
it's
China's
going-
worse, go over there. What is that?
No,
That's
my
trash.
bottom line is it's going too far to say the U.S. has slavery in the country today. That's going too far. And if you're going to say that, then then you can't even reserve that term. China and our foreign adversaries do practice, I wouldn't use the word slavery well, exactly, they're doing mass political persecution and imprisonment of dissidents. So we have to reserve those terms for our adversaries, because what they're doing is so much worse, like a 10 times worse scale. So we can't say that about us, because then what do we even have left to say about them? Because what they're doing is worse.
I know, but our
We do some
bottom
bad things,
line is not
but
what
we're
China's
good.
doing. Our bottom line is living up to our Constitution. We shouldn't be saying, well, China's worse. Like, their bottom line could be underground, and that doesn't mean we have to match it and say, oh, we're higher. That doesn't mean we're doing well
I
in
think
certain
we should
areas.
have pride on how much better we are than China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, etc.
Robby, tell everybody about what's on your radar.
Somehow Kamala returned, quoting those dreadful Star Wars sequel movies, in case you can't tell. Anyway, Kamala Harris got some good news from the latest CNN stats. According to Harry Enton, my favorite pollster, voters are having buyer's remorse, and if we could somehow redo the 2024 election, she would actually beat Donald Trump. So says Enton. Take a look.
Regrets of some folks had a few. What are we talking about here? Well, let's just take a look here. Okay, choice for 2024 presidential election. The actual was Donald Trump winning by about 1.5 points. It rounds to a point. But take a look here. In a polled redo between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris in April of 2025, it was within the margin of error, right? Kamala Harris by a point. But look at where we are now, according to an NBC News SurveyMonkey poll. Kamala Harris wins in a redo, asking folks, essentially, if you could redo the 2024 election, how would you vote? She wins it by, get this, 8 points, a massive shift from what we saw back in November of 2024 when Donald Trump won by 1 point. And I will note that this sample was weighted to the 2024 result in which Donald Trump won by 1 point, but yet Kamala Harris in this weighted sample, get this, she wins by 8 amongst the sample that voted for Trump by 1.
Now, there's just one problem. We obviously can't go back in time and re-vote. Moreover, it's just not that strange for voters to lose some faith in the incumbent and swing back toward the other party. I suspect that's what this poll is capturing. Some frustration with Trump and the GOP, not genuine enthusiasm for Kamala Harris. But of course, Harris is welcome to read it however she wants, however her heart desires. And she has given every indication that she intends to run for president again, even though many of the leaders of her own party are betting on other folks. Nancy Pelosi has already thrown her support behind Gavin Newsom. And the left-wing base of the party, which is probably sick of having their candidates overlooked by leadership, will be pulling out all the stops for AOC. Harris, on the other hand, I suppose, has to argue that she's owed a do-over. After all, she didn't get to run her campaign her way. She only had a couple weeks to sell herself to the American people, owing to Joe Biden's late exit from that race. Would more time have really benefited Kamala, though? I think that's an open question, but the answer is no. Kamala lost support over the course of the race as it became clear she was not at all prepared to separate herself from Biden at all. In fact, there appears to be some kind of inverse correlation between Harris's popularity and her presence on the national stage. Now that she's mostly unseen and unheard, I guess she's popular again with respect to Trump. But if she were actually out there campaigning for president, reminding everyone about her, my guess is voters would remember that they don't have confidence in her in the first place. Now, she's got a couple years to figure out a winning message, of course, but I have a feeling that Kamala Harris's time has come and it has gone. Voters want a fresh face. Democratic primary voters want someone who will channel their anger and their rage and evince their far-left politics. Does that really sound like Harris? I'm not even convinced it sounds like Gavin Newsom. Frankly, it mostly sounds like AOC. That is the one to watch for. As a reminder, it's not sane normal people voting in Democratic primaries, it's Democratic primary voters. So we'll find out about that in 2028.
That is not nice. Not sane normal normal people. These are sane.
Democratic primary voters, not sane, not
Yes, they are. They're very normal.
I'd say
and
the same
sane.
about Republican primary
Okay.
voters. Not sane, not normal. They're about to choose Ken Paxton to be the Republican in Texas, someone who has a dramatically lower chance of winning and is scandal-plagued, but they can't help themselves. Democratic primary voters the same way.
Okay,
primary
fine.
voters are bad.
I think, you're just wiping this, with a huge brush and just saying, oh, this doesn't work like this. Well, Trump didn't win in 2020 and then came back with a vengeance because people thought, well, his old economy worked better than Biden's current economy, so we're going to bring the old guy back. So you understand how this works, right? It's not like frustration is not the same thing as enthusiasm because it's only a two-party system. Right. So if you're frustrated at one, guess who wins? The other party. So this is really a time where that's how our system works, whether you like it or not. And Biden also himself lost the Democratic nomination twice, 2008, 1998. So, and then he became president. It happens all the time in our politics where somebody who didn't have the right moment and didn't have the right campaign all of a sudden does, and now they're the president. It happened with Trump, who's the president right now. I also think that
she didn't ever win the nomination.
You're right. That's a difference. So she has a distinct opportunity to differentiate herself and the time that she was asking for. I'm not saying that she's my favorite pick. I'm saying that you sound so confident about the fact that more time wouldn't have helped her. But there really is a strategic thought to more time, right? You need to have donor ramp up. You need to have some field infrastructure. She needs to have differing messaging from Biden, which is really difficult to do if you're serving as vice president under someone who people were highly critical of. And it seemed that he didn't really want to give her the opportunity to run for president. He was more forced to by people like Nancy Pelosi and others.
Well, he wanted to give her the opportunity in 4 years.
He didn't want to give it to her right now. He wanted to run again. So I think there's like layers to this whole thing where she probably lacked some of that confidence because she didn't know how far was too far without completely destroying the party or the administration that she built.
It takes to win.
No, you can't. You're working it
ruthlessly
because then you would call her weak for sitting there as vice president and accepting all the policies that Biden pushed forward for the last 4 years. So she was damned if you do, damned if you don't in that situation. So more time.
Was damned if you do and damned if you
don't. So more time would certainly differentiate her. And people, we know how this goes with Trump fatigue, and we know how this goes when people get exhausted of the antics. All those people in the middle that were like supporting Nikki Haley, that were okay with Trump's policy suggestions on the campaign
all
trail.
Those people supporting Nikki Haley, what? All those.
She was polling.
People?
No, she was polling like in the teens at a certain point. Like people were really.
Oh yeah, she was really.
That's not a high, no, it's not a high polling. I'm saying these are independent people that also maybe didn't like Kamala for some of the things that she was doing that were too left leaning. There's people that still vote in elections, and we've had studies saying that's more of the electorate that doesn't feel aligned with a party wholly. So you have to be somebody who can bring those people over, and perhaps with all the Trump fatigue and the antics and not living up to what he said he would do on the campaign trail, now Kamala has an opportunity to explain what she would have done differently than Biden and also be maybe a stable force that people were looking for, just something calm and collected. That's exactly why Biden won in 2020, because people were looking for something calm after Trump.
Yes. People are looking for economic stability, and that's what Trump promised, and he hasn't fully delivered on that, so there is some fatigue setting in, and that's not good. And Republicans' window to fix that is closing, which is why I am worried that if Democrats could nominate a far-left radical like AOC, and she could actually become president, and that would be terrifying.
You're so worried? I mean, if Trump was able to become president, and it's not terrifying enough to have me move to Canada, I think that you can deal with an AOC presidency and it'll be just fine. We'll have lots to talk about, and I'll have lots of defending to do probably.
I mean, I'll enjoy my job more. That's true. You'll be on defense, and I'll be on offense.
Because every day you have to explain.
It's way more fun to be on offense than it is to be on defense.
And every day you got to explain the antics to me and get to the policy that's buried somewhere in there under all these antics. And
so much fun I'm having.